Shalom. God bless. Today we're going to share with you about church mapping, basically to identify the weakness and strength of the RAD church. Let us recall, after you have started a church in a new place, based on step 6 on page 2, you begin to track that church health. First, you're going to draw a 2-story church on the body of Christ. You put down the name of the church planter, the location name, and date started this church. After you have taught the first believers all the 3 first lessons, you're going to put the 3. After you have given the first person baptism, you draw this symbol. After you have given the baptized believers the Lord's Supper, you draw this symbol. After you have taught the 7 lessons of Paul's pattern to the new church, you're going to draw 7. After leaders have been appointed, in this case Timothy, you're going to draw the symbols, and also you put down the name of this Timothy. And then after this Timothy is empowered to lead the worship using the next step of discipleship, you're going to draw this symbol. After this Timothy are given the power to do baptism, you draw this symbol. After this Timothy is empowered to conduct Holy Communion, you draw this symbol. And after the church has appointed a treasurer, so we put down the $sign. After the church is doing well, using the 5 functions, we draw these 5 functions. And after the church is going and continue to meet other LD churches, we draw the arrow. And also we're going to take note of the total members, worshippers of this church, average attendance, believers, and baptized believers. So first we're going to look at the various areas. First, whether this church is growing rapidly or planting church rapidly. So we have to look at date started, date of multiplication of the 2nd generation. And then we also look at discipleship, the start on the first floor, whether 3 lessons, 7 lessons, baptism, Holy Communion are ministered within 3 months and completed within 3 months. Then we also look at the 2nd floor, whether it's in place by the 3rd month, Timothy is appointed, and then all the various functions of Timothy's carried out. And then we continue to remind ourselves to diagnose the health and determine the next action. So we look at the date the church planted, how many churches planted, pay attention to the dates of generation, how many non-believers did they share the gospel, 2, 3, 4, how many did they disciple or teach ABC. The number of disciples means the number of new churches planted. If number of new churches started will few, very likely they were not following RAD church worship service. And step 6, pay attention to timing of lesson ABC and Paul lesson, when they started, when they're completed. Are they giving? The church planter cannot plant more than 6 churches because there are only 7 days in a week. Is assistant leader or Timothy appointed? Is the assistant leader or Timothy empowered to lead church service, baptism, communion, etc. And study the difference between the total members, average attendance, baptized, and believers. You'll look at it later on in the real mapping. Let us draw simple generation mapping. First row means first generation. That's referred to the father or Paul generation. So the first row. Second row means second generation, means the son or Timothy. So you can see the second row. Third row means third generation, the grandson of faithful men. Remember 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul, Timothy, faithful men, and others. So this is the third generation. So you will draw the church sideway. It means you actually planting churches by the same person. Maximum each person only can plant 6 churches. But you can plant many churches by aiming to draw downwards, that is by multiplication by different generations. The more Timothy you have, the more churches you can plant. Let us look at a 3 generations mapping. I'll show you step by step. A1 started 2 churches himself. That means same row, A1, and then A2. A1 started 1 church by his Timothy. That means under A1, there's 1 Timothy, planted 1 church, B1, that's 1. B1 started 1 church by himself. That means same row as B1, that's 1. That's the second row. So this is B1, that's 1A. A1 started 1 church by another Timothy, again under A1, but different Timothy. So B1-2. A1 started another church by himself, same row as A1. So it will be same row, the first row, A3. And then A3 started 1 church by his Timothy. That means must be under A3. So his Timothy started 1 church, B3-1. B3-1 started 1 church by his Timothy. That means must be under B3-1. We get C3-1. So here we can see 3 generations started by A1, and today they have 8 churches. So now let us have a look at RED Church. RED Church prefer not to be too big. We have to understand the communication lines. It means A to B, B to A. If there are 5%, means 5 times 4 means 20. The formula is n between bracket n minus 1. Let us give you the example. 2%, A going to speak to B, and B speak to A, 2 lines. You've got 3% means 6 lines. A going to speak to B, B going to speak to A, and then we see B speak to C, C speak to B, and A speak to C, C speak to A, 6 lines. So you can imagine 5%. Even they're sitting in a circle facing each other, there are 20 communication lines. So just imagine, the more members in the church, more difficult it is. Example, if your church has 10 worshippers, how many communication lines? 90. If your church has 20 worshippers, how many communication lines? 380. It's a lot. Now let us look at this church. It's a real church, just submitted a few days ago. First, you look at this number. You realize that there are only 4 baptized believers, but there are 13 believers here. So that means what happened to the 9 believers that haven't baptized? And then attendance is 16. A believer is 13. So what happened to other 3? Is it non-believers? And then you will see the total attendance, total members 22, but average attendance is 16. What happened to the 6? So we have to ask ourselves. And then we can look at other areas. So this church started on 10th of January. By 18th of January, second church. And then they also the third church. And then they're also going downwards. By September, the second generation. And then October, the third generations. And then October, the fourth generations. So you look at each church carefully. Like example, let's say we look at this church. This church is May, but we don't see the Timothy. Where is Timothy? That means that this church will have a problem to multiply. Without Timothy, you cannot multiply. And then let's say you look at again, you look at some of the possible date. This one started 8th of September. Today is November. Let's say 11, 2 months. But we haven't seen the 7. That means discipleship slacken. So we have to look at all these areas, and you look carefully at every area. Even like here, got 5 believers, there's no baptism. And so we have to ask ourselves. Every individual church planters, we have to analyze every individual church and look at all the symbols there, all the 3, 7, and then Timothy, baptism, Holy Communion. We look at every areas and look at the date started, when is it multiplied, and many other areas. Hope you enjoy it. God bless.